Welcome into the quest for the perfect bracket. I've got Wayne Staats with me, our NCAA digital lead bracket reporter who's been studying bracket data for over 10 years. Wayne, we're going to look at the data. We're getting less than 24 hours since the selection show in the women's tournament and a lot of exciting stuff. Let's look at the numbers and how fans are picking in their brackets. Who's the most popular champ pick so far?
Yeah, so this is, I think, kind of cool and interesting. UConn, which can be like, well, yeah, I mean, UConn, it's like, yeah, they're good every year. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. But the crazy thing is that UConn is only a 2 seed, and they're getting picked the most. We've never seen that before.
Yeah.
It's so that's kind of it's out to me that 2 seed is getting picked more than anybody else. It just for context on the men's side, usually not always, but usually the number one overall seed or just another number one seed is always the most picked on the men's side.
Right.
Last year, UConn was on the men's side and they won it. This year, right now, looks like Duke is going to be on the men's side, but on the women's side this year, it's a 2 seed. Again, if 2 seed UConn is no, it's people with teams. We know who that is. The star power
Right.
is great. They have a strong history there. You can see they're due for a title. It's been almost a decade since they last won. Maybe we think this is going to be the time. But the fact
Yeah.
that a 1 seed is not the most picked overall team is kind of surprising.
But just to clarify, that's never happened before?
No, not that we've seen. So
Yeah.
again, yeah, I think it's kind of a perfect storm because the last 2 years we had an undefeated South Carolina team, which I mean, of
Right.
course, that's going to take most of the picks. Hear how it just means it's more spread out this year. Last year, South Carolina was picked to win on 38% of brackets, just about. This year, UConn is about 27.5%. So I mean, that's still good, but it's a lot lower for that top team than it was last year.
Yeah.
And last year was interesting because last year was South Carolina and Iowa were they were picked to win on a combined 68% of brackets. So more than two-thirds had one of those two teams winning. And sure enough, that was a title game. But this year, the top two teams combined for about like 49%, which is still, we're talking still like half the brackets have one or two teams winning. That's UConn or South Carolina this year, but a lot lower than what we saw last year. They're just more teams getting picked. More teams getting picked this year than we saw last year. Only 3 got picked at 5% last year. We're at 5 this year, which is kind of
Okay.
interesting. And again, we're not saying that UConn means that no one's picking the 1 seeds. It's just that because after UConn, it's the 4 1 seeds.
Yeah.
But just that UConn is getting picked more than the 1 seeds, and Notre Dame is getting picked ahead of the other 2 seeds, which is interesting. Notre Dame was kind of, I think people are surprised they were only a 3 seed in the bracket reveal, but they're getting picked about 4.5%. So that's the top of the 3 seed line. LSU right behind them. They're the next in line at about above 2%. But just interesting to note that, again, UConn is getting picked the most, which without the seeds, you think, well, yeah, of course, UConn's getting picked a lot. But with the fact that they're the 2 seed and above all the ones, I think it's pretty interesting.
And then South Carolina's second favorite, then UCLA, followed by USC. Okay, so let's
Yep.
take a look at the first round. I know that the women's tournament isn't notorious for a ton of first round upsets, but is there anything that stands out in terms of what people are picking right now?
Yeah, so you're totally right about lack of upsets. Last year, there was only one first round upset, and that was Middle Tennessee, an 11 seed, and that was the most picked upset by bracket pickers last year. So
Wow.
people got it right last year on the women's
Fans
side.
are pretty knowledgeable.
Yeah, although I think we thought there'd be more, but the number one most picked was the one that came into fruition. But the top upset pick this year is Grand Canyon from the 13 line, which is pretty unusual. Getting picked in almost 20% of brackets, which is pretty high. It's again not as so it's higher than the 11s and 12s. And you think 11 seed, that's what Middle Tennessee was last year, would be the most
Right.
popular upset pick. And George Mason is getting picked about above 16%. So again, we're not saying no one's picking the 11 seed, just that a 13 seed Grand Canyon is getting picked the most of pulling an upset, which means a win by a team seed at least 5 seeds or worse than their opponent. So Grand Canyon's a pick. They're playing Baylor. So Baylor is the one that people think is going out early. We'll see if that happens. But it's kind of interesting to note there. But I think the cool thing, too, for first round is the toughest game to pick right now is Indiana and Utah. That's an
Ooh.
8-9 game, which probably isn't surprising, but it's almost exactly 50-50, which I think is pretty cool. We'll see the numbers just
Wow.
there. So a lot, which for context, because that's always good to know. On the men's side, the closest picked is like 57-43%. So that's
Wow.
like women's a lot more tighter there. But again, that could change. We'll see if it adjusts there. But that's kind of the big things to notice. But a couple of things is like the historical value of trying to see if something we've never seen before happened this year.
Right.
We've never seen a 15 or 14 win the women's tournament Could this be the year if you want to go there and if you want to make that jump? The top 14 seed is Florida Gulf Coast, which has a history of winning at games in the tournament, not as a 14, of
Yes.
course, but as pulling off upsets. And 15 Vermont is the highest on that seed line. Vermont is about the same as last year in terms of the top 15. 14 Florida Gulf Coast is a little lower than last year's top 14 pick, but for a 14 seed, Florida Gulf Coast is pretty dangerous. They know how to win. They don't win in March. So we'll see if that can happen or not. But just kind of some fun notes there as day one kind of gets rolling.
And then just as terms of making it further into the tournament, you mentioned Grand Canyon. Are they looking like the top Cinderella pick on the women's side?
Yeah, they're in the Sweet 16 on 14% of brackets, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
And on the Final Four, they're in the Final Four on 2% of brackets. So
Okay.
it's this kind of thing where the people who like Grand Canyon are sticking with them at a higher rate than you would see from other upset picks. So the support is strong with Grand Canyon. We'll see if they are the upset pick this year. Maybe we'll get more than one in the first round this year.
Absolutely. And then anything in the Final Four outside of what you've already said? I believe South Carolina is the top pick to make the Final Four.
Yeah, South Carolina is the highest pick at 72.5, 73%, followed by UCLA and UConn. So kind of cool twist that UConn is not the most picked the Final Four, but UConn does have a potential late game with USC. So that's like a tough one where it's a strong dividing line where, some people are off that UConn bus at that point, but the ones who stick with UConn are going to stick with them through the championship, which kind of makes sense. But UConn is still getting picked higher than Texas and USC to make the Final Four. In fact, South Carolina, UCLA, and UConn are the only three getting picked to make the Final Four in more than half of brackets, and that's still pretty high.
All right. Well, we will keep bringing everybody updates every single day until brackets lock on Friday and the tournament starts. It's the most fun time of the year with March Madness here. So stay tuned for the updates. But Stats, thanks for breaking it down.